Even the toughest layers of clothes were cut by the biting chill carried by the winter wind howling through the tall trees. A little wooden home, its windows softly shimmering with the flickering light of a fireplace, stood against the storm deep in the mountains. Ranger Garrett was sitting at his desk inside, sipping coffee and reading over his battered field notebook. The only sound disturbing the stillness of the night was the crackling fire, a consoling rhythm amid the otherwise remote countryside. After years of monitoring these tough territories, Garrett recorded the animals and ensured the fragile environment stayed unaltered. He had seen many amazing sights: hawks swooping high over the treetops, wolves gliding like shadows under the darkness, and stately elk wandering across the snowfields. Nothing, though, could have prepared him for what he was going to see that evening. The cabin shook from a sudden blast of wind, and the ranger looked up automatically. His gaze moved towards the frost-covered window, where the swirling snow limited the view to just a few feet beyond the hut walls. He was going to return to his notes when something unexpected drew his attention. A form, barely recognizable against the white landscape, standing immobile in the storm. He narrowed his eyes and leaned forward to have a better look by rubbing his palm on the frozen window pane. There, just at the edge of the tree line, stood a monster unlike any he had seen so near to human civilization. Its fur was a mesmerizing combination of golden brown and grey, powdered with the falling snow. With black tufts, the animal's ears twitched slightly, alert and apprehensive. But Thomas found great resonance in its eyes, piercing amber, shining with a combination of terror and will. A bobcat. Bobcats had the ranger seen before, but never this near his cabin. Known to shun human presence, the elusive cat would withdraw into the deep bush at the least hint of threat. Still, this one stood strong, its slender physique shivering in the cold, paws just half covered in the snow. Garrett wrinkled anxiety building in his chest. There seems to be a mistake. Her breath coming out in short, obvious gasps informed him the bobcat was not just passing by. Garrett noticed her trembling, and this wasn't just from the cold alone. Her ribs were protruded, and her movement seemed labored. He wondered if she was injured. When she shifted was when he caught sight of it. Her belly was bulging. The realization hit him instantly. She was pregnant. Her desperation must have been strong enough to approach the strange warmth of his hut during the terrible winter storm. Unsure of what to do, Garrett decided to check in with his ranger contacts via his emergency radio. However, the storm had knocked out the signal he was on. Now he was left on his own to rely on his instincts and the knowledge he had. Garrett was familiar with the hazards. Bobcats were wild creatures, hence getting one into his house was not a smart idea. But he couldn't turn her away, staring into her frantic eyes. Slowly, tentatively, he reached for the door handle and took a deep breath. He then steadily opened the door to allow the golden glory of the fire to pour into the evening. At first, the bobcat moved slowly. Her body stiffened, ears flicked back as if assessing her choices. She froze. Garrett stayed steady, without moving suddenly, so she could make decisions. Minutes turned by. Still, neither moved as the storm tore about them and the cold crept into the gateway. The bobcat then went across the threshold with a steady, deliberate step. She had chosen to believe him. And with that quiet choice, an amazing link was about to develop, one that would permanently alter both of their life. The warmth of the fire enveloped the cabin like a safe cocoon, hiding them from the roaring storm outside. Just over the doorway, the bobcat paused, her amber eyes darting about the strange territory. Every muscle in her slender form stayed tight, poised to fly at the slightest hint of threat. Garrett didn't move. Trust, particularly from a wild animal, he understood was not given lightly. He only observed her so she can enjoy her surroundings at her own speed. The only sound accompanying the moment was the quiet buzz of the wind outside. The cracking fire created flickering shadows on the wooden walls. After what felt like an age, the bobcat took another step forward, her paws soundless on the hardwood floor. She breathed a steady breath and her body relaxed, just slightly. The warmth seemed to penetrate her bones. She didn't flee. That started it. Garrett gave her room by gently backing off. He wanted nothing at all to make her feel imprisoned. He proceeded to the little kitchen, bringing out a piece of cooked venison from his supper earlier that evening. Simple survival knowledge, offering food, might be a means of building trust. He placed the meat on a small dish and carefully dropped it on the floor a few feet away from her. Then he backed off once again. The nose of the bobcat jerked. She could still detect the strong fragrance of the meal, even if the storm had dampened most others. Hunger battled in her head with moderation. Minutes went by. Slowly, nervously, she took a step forward. Finally, another. Her tummy was big with the life she carried, and every movement felt more work than it ought to have required. She gently smelt the dish when she got to it, but returned to collapse by the fire. After what felt like a long while, she came back to the dish and chewed a tiny piece. She dropped doubt and ate with calm determination, consuming every morsel the minute it reached her tongue. Garrett let out a slow breath. She had nothing but hunger. He watched her very carefully while she ate. Though pregnancy had made her seem bigger, she was smaller than he imagined. Though thick, her fur was dull, probably from hunger and weariness. For a pregnant predator, nature was even more merciless in winter. He felt a flood of empathy. She had battled to survive, to shield the small ones inside her, and now, against all the obstacles, she had come to him. She licked her paws and raised her head towards him as the food vanished. Her keen eyes locked with his to scrutinize him in turn. Only curiosity, no growl or indication of anxiety. For the first time, Garrett sensed a change between them. The bobcat was no longer only a guest staying at his cabin. She visited him. And with that insight, an unsaid knowledge developed. She remained safe. She was safe for the first time in probably a long, demanding winter. The days went in the calm company. The bobcat had embraced the warmth of the cabin, and though she remained cautious, her piercing eyes no longer communicated fear. Her slow, deliberate walks favored the softest areas of the room where she could snuggle up and relax. Garrett kept his distance, respecting her space. He kept distributing food, constantly watching closely to make sure she was eating enough. Every now and then, he would turn over and see her staring at him, her amber eyes full of something between gentle thankfulness and inquiry. Then, one evening, something started to alter. Thick blankets of snow hammered against the wooden cottage walls, the storm outside unrelenting. As if the forest itself were attempting to recapture her, the wind howled through the trees, rattling the windows. With her body restless and ears snapping back in annoyance, the bobcat paced the little area. Something was going on. Garrett stared, worry knotting in his chest. He had seen this before. Wild deer with foxes hidden in the undergrowth. The signals were obvious. She was about to start labor. Deep instinct started to awaken in him. Over his years as a ranger, he had helped birth many creatures. However, he had never seen a predator, never something so wild and uncontrolled. Though he knew better than to meddle, he stayed near ready in case she needed assistance. With her body curling inward as trembles passed her, the bobcat went to the farthest corner of the cabin. She gave a deep, guttural growl, a sound of both anguish and will. Then quiet. Minutes went by, stretched out indefinitely, and then the first little cry. Garrett held his breath and saw a little, fragile form surface. The cub's first is a wonder in golden fur, still with firmly closed eyelids. The mother wasted no time, automatically licking the infant clean, her rough tongue warming the frail body. Still, another wail came from me. Again. Third. 3 small life had entered the world right there within the wooden walls of his hut. Garrett breathed, his throat feeling strange constriction. Though he had spent years seeing the natural grandeur of the woods, never like this, never so up close. The mother wrapped around her pups, protecting them with her warmth. She closed her eyes for the first time since she arrived, in tranquility rather than in terror. And while Garrett looked, the storm outside seemed to calm, as though nature herself had stopped to pay tribute to the entrance of fresh life. The next several days at the cabin seemed almost dreamlike. Garrett had spent years living alone in the forest, used to the peace and quiet of his ranger station, but suddenly his environment had changed. The once silent area was alive with the delicate mewling of the newborn cubs, their little voices shattering the calm of the cabin. Alert and never venturing far from her babies, the mother bobcat stayed. She had welcomed Garrett's presence, but always there was a boundary he knew not to cross. He approached cautiously, making sure he never went too close, but he stayed a silent sentinel viewing from a reasonable distance. Every morning he set a bowl of food next to her resting area, a little gift she now gladly accepted. Though she would still narrow her amber eyes if he stayed too long near her, her faith in him had increased. Unaware of the caution reigning over the wild, the cubs lacked such doubts. The days went by, and they strengthened. Once brittle and wet, their fur grew into velvety coats of golden grey. Their once blind eyes opened to show curious deep blue depths shining. Garrett built a pension enclosure behind the cabin. There, the cubs practiced climbing sapling and stalking shadows. Their mother, which Garrett had named Luna, taught them with quiet precision. Garrett was enthralled with their little, awkward motions. Their little paws flailing at the air as they sought to replicate the might of their mother, they fell over each other in playful skirmishes. They attacked at shadows, at stray threads from Thomas's old blanket, and occasionally, when they thought she wasn't looking, at his boots. Often wandering a bit too far, one cub, the most audacious of the three, sniffed at the hardwood floor and gave out small, excited chirps whenever it came upon anything novel. Though a single low growl would send the little one rushing back to her side, the mother would observe with a luxurious calm. Garrett found himself grinning at their antics. Once his haven from the severity of winter, the cabin had changed into something else entirely, a house alive. Still, he knew these days would not endure forever, even as much he loved them. The cubs got more powerful every dawn. Once unstable, their legs corrected themselves. Their light-hearted pounces become increasingly exact. Once full of naive delight, their eyes now reflected the acute knowledge of the wild. Spring was almost here. The black ground was showing through the thinning snow outside. The mountain would blossom once more soon, and the forest would welcome them home. Garrett was aware of approaching events. The mother understood it as well. For now, though, for just a little bit more, they stayed together in the coziness of the cabin in the delicate in-between of two worlds. Garrett took pictures of the family and radioed wildlife experts, who advised him to release them when ready, but his heart kept on resisting. As the days extended into spring, Garrett realized his time with the Bobcat family was coming to an end. The snow outside had started to melt, exposing the tall trees in brown areas. Winter's frigid hold was released, and with it came the subdued whisper of change. Once little and delicate, the cubs had developed into confident, agile animals. Their once clumsy motions suddenly possessed the fluid grace of their mother. Their playful pounces became precise blows. They no longer hesitated before ascending furniture, testing their power as they sprang onto the windowsills from the wooden chairs. The mother, Luna, had become agitated. Garrett saw how her nose sniffed the pure mountain air as she sat close to the entrance and how her ears pricked at the sounds outside. She got ready. Instinct informed her that it was time to return to the forest, to raise her offspring in the place they truly belonged. Garrett sat by the fire one evening as the sun sank beyond the trees. The mother bobcat sat erect, her keen eyes riveted onto him. She seemed to know, too, that their time together was almost finished. He inhaled deeply and stood up, heading towards the cabin door. He opened the chilly wind, which surged inside and smelt pine and wet ground. The cubs paused, their little bodies gathered near to their mother. But she didn't hesitate. She moved very slowly towards the door. She turned back once, her amber eyes silently acknowledging what had passed between them, an unsaid link between man and wild. She then went outdoors, her paws slipping into the dissolving snow. The cubs trailed one at a time. The first of the three to cross the threshold looked back at Garrett with brilliant, inquisitive eyes, then sprang following its mother. The second cub hesitated, tweeting gently, then vanished into the last of the light. The youngest cub paused at the doorway, its tiny figure silhouetted against the woodland beyond. Thomas momentarily considered it may go backward. But then, with one final look, it ran from its family into the woods. Garrett stayed there for some time, fixated on the area where they had vanished. Now the cabin seemed empty, their warmth replaced by a silence. But he felt no grief as he turned back inside. As Garrett flipped through the pictures, a bobcat curled by the hearth, cubs tumbling in the snow, he smiled. He was grateful. For a winter spent surrounded by nature, for the laughing of a young mother bobcat and her faith, for the reminder that life finds a means to flourish even in the most severe of winters. Knowing that somewhere out there they were secure, strong, and precisely where they were supposed to be, Garrett sat down and closed his eyes while the fire crackled quietly. The memory of the bobcat family accompanied him,